Hello, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the National Parents Union presents Speak Your Truth with yours truly, Vivett Dukes. It's wonderful to be here tonight, wonderful to be here every night with all of you. It has been quite a day, quite a last few days, to be honest with you, with going back to school in session. And here in New York, we had an announcement that as opposed to the hybrid model that was offered to parents throughout the summer and up until today, we will now, the New York City Department of Education will now be fully remote throughout up until October 1st for high school students. And so that's definitely weighing on me tonight, as education is always at the forefront of my mind and a solution to so many of our societal ills. For me is is education. And so it is by no chance tonight that our guest is an esteemed educator across many different platforms, who has a really amazing career, an inspiring career. I'd like to share more about her with you now by reading her bio for you. Dr. Mikki Shaw has been teaching in a variety of settings for a very long time. Mikki taught high school English for 20 years prior to getting her doctorate and teaching full-time at the college level. After 10 years as an assistant professor of English education at Teachers College, Columbia University, she served as the director of a teacher education program at Manhattanville College. Her experience teaching secondary school on both the East and West Coast, in traditional and alternative schools, in the suburbs, as well as in the inner city, has reinforced a real commitment to public education and to students at risk. Currently, she is teaching college English classes in Sing Sing, the maximum security correctional facility in Ossining, New York, where she works with some of the smartest, most interesting, and committed students of her career. She is fond of saying that free public education is the single best invention since fire. Please join me in welcoming our esteemed guest tonight, Dr. Mikki Shaw. Good evening, Dr. Shaw.
Hi there.
How are you this evening?
Pretty good.
Pretty good. It's
As
wonderful.
well as you can be when you take a shower and get dressed to sit in front of a screen instead of go somewhere.
I wish I could reach out and touch you and give you a really big hug. You are definitely one of my favorite educators, for sure.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Your bio says you spanned quite the gamut of
a long time.
Yeah, a long time. Why did you initially become an educator?
Oh, that's my mother used to say, because I'm bossy. That was her explanation. I grew up in a family that, really respected education. Nobody in my family had ever been to college, but they all thought that my sister and I should go to college. I guess it was a different world by then, and you could think about it, we could afford it. So I went to college, and I don't ever remember deciding to be a teacher. I just was going to be a teacher. It just, now that you're asking me that, I don't have a real answer. I just always, and when I went student teaching, I had a very bizarre experience. My cooperating teacher was about to retire. And the second day that I was there, he took his trombone, I kid you not, went to the basement and started practicing his trombone and never came back. Just left me alone with my classes. And I loved it. I was very happy.
Wow. Wow. I can imagine. So, funny story too with my cooperating teacher. I would always look to her, in the back of the room.
Mhm.
She was there, but she wasn't really. She said, "You have this.
Yeah.
You stop looking at me. Stop looking for me because you have this. And in reality, in a few months, I'm not going to be here. Then what are you going to do?"
Mhm.
And she said, today I'm going to be right outside this door, and you just go for it. And it was one of, like, I knew then, like, yep, this is for me. I'm at home. This is
Yep.
wonderful, wonderful.
I
Where
think
did you go to school?
teaching is kind of a calling. I don't think it's something, I mean, some people do it because it's convenient and they can get home early, but to do it right, it's a calling. Where did I go to school? I got my BA and my master's degree from SUNY New Paltz, and then I got my doctorate from Columbia.
Oh, wonderful. You're a New Yorker through and through.
Doctor through and through, although I lived in California for 4 years. I
Yes, I
taught
saw
out
you.
there too.
So you taught on the West Coast also. Is that where you taught in the alternative school?
I taught in an alternative school in Poughkeepsie, and I taught in an alternative school in Berkeley, California, both.
Oh, oh. So I know you, however, as being an educator in Sing Sing, as my husband's favorite educator there, his favorite professor, his own words. And you quickly became someone I respected very much. You can imagine having a wife who's an English teacher who's reading over what you're submitting.
Yeah.
And, you know, I often disagreed with some of the grades and comments that he was getting on his papers and said, well, I wouldn't, that's not, if you were in my class, I wouldn't grade you that way. And he thought I was being unduly harsh on him. And then I saw a paper that you gave back to him. And in a loving way, you corrected him, like, no, John, do this, do that. And I said, yes, finally, someone else is substantiating what I've been telling him.
Mhm.
And I just respected you so much for elevating my husband and for pushing him to be his best academically.
Mhm. I think
Um,
that is a little bit of a problem. I think so many of the professors come in and they're so excited because these are people who really want to learn and they are working hard and they don't want to discourage them. So it is walking a fine line between not wanting to discourage somebody and just letting things slide. I think that's the deal.
I know you have some things that you want to share with us tonight, so I'd like to just give you the opportunity to impart some of your knowledge and wisdom with us, if you would.
I would love to. Um, when you asked me to talk about Sing Sing, it was sort of a little overwhelming. And it's not because I don't talk about it. I talk about it all the time. My husband is back there. You'll notice he's doing something else. There's nothing I'm going to say that he hasn't heard several times. He's there because he's my tech support in case something doesn't work. But I do talk about teaching at Sing Sing because it's been a remarkable experience. It's not an easy place to teach. Um, as I wrote in the bio, some of the best students and some of the most interesting thinkers I've ever met are my students at Sing Sing. But getting in and out of there, which you know about, many people do, is not easy. The physical classrooms are awful. They're overheated at all times of year, and there's no light, and the shades are ripped. The unpredictable scheduling, yes, this class, but we're starting late, or no, there's not class. It's all very unpredictable, and that makes it very difficult to teach. But I did want to talk for a few minutes about some of the things that are challenging and some that are kind of surprising. The first thing, and maybe the most obvious thing, is the politics of my teaching there. And I always say it when I start a class. I'm a white woman teaching a population. First of all, I'm a woman in a population of men. and so I'm always a minority and I have a different point of view stemming from that. But I'm also a white person, and the last few times, the last 3 semesters, I taught Harlem Renaissance literature. So here I am, this white lady, and I'm going to come in and teach Black people how to read Black literature. And that is odd. It's odd to me. Sometimes I think I shouldn't be doing it, but I don't see anybody behind me trying to say that I shouldn't. And sometimes what's really odd is that I have to convince my students that there are politics involved, because they are used to a classroom situation where the teacher is the authoritarian and she or he tells you stuff and you write it down and that's it. So if I come in and say, look, I have academic tools, I'm happy to share it with you, but especially about this kind of literature, you have tools I don't have. Maybe you can talk about Harlem, maybe you can talk about culture, maybe there's some language I don't know. There's always language I don't know. Those are things I would welcome, and they kind of look at me, you know, that often that's a new idea to them. Another thing related, but a little bit different, is that we come to the classroom with just different understandings. And if we don't delve into that a little bit, sometimes we're at cross purposes. And the story I love to tell about that is, and I wish John were here because
John's coming. So if you want to hold off on that one till he comes, I just told him he's getting dressed, he's coming.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll save that one for last and see if he turns up.
Okay.
As far as different understandings, the word articulate is a big hot button. And I didn't know that, but a lot of my students, if I say that they are articulate, see that as code for a Black person who knows how to talk.
White.
They're white.
Yes.
Okay, you know, and we've argued about that, because I will say, hey, it's a perfectly good word, and I'm not willing to trash it completely because it has bad connotations. On the other hand, I recognize that it has some connotations for you, so I'll try not to use it in a way that you might find offensive. Another example of that kind of thing, I had a student come up to me one night with a paper, and he was obviously visibly upset. And he said, what did you mean here? What are you saying here? And I looked at the paper and it said, boy, that's really something. And he read it as, boy, that's really something. He thought I was addressing him as boy. Oh. And I was so glad that he pointed it out to me. It was not a mistake I will ever make again, but of course that isn't how I was using it. But had he not said something, we would have been, you know, he would have been pissed all semester, and I wouldn't have known why. I'm going to go ahead. Oh, there's John.
There's John.
John, I was kind of waiting for you because
he's not on yet. When we see his face, then he'll be on.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and tell this, and if he remembers it differently, it might be interesting.
Hello?
Hi, John. There you go. I've been dancing around because I want to tell a story from a class that I think you were in. Okay. And that is when I introduced a story called The Lottery. And I started by saying, what do you think of when you think of a lottery?
Oh.
And somebody said, well, I think of the draft lottery. And I thought about that for a minute. And I said, well, that's really interesting, because I wouldn't have thought most of you were old enough to remember the draft and Vietnam.
I do remember you talking about the lottery. Yeah, go ahead. Yes, okay.
They're looking at me like, what? And it took about a minute and a half to unravel the fact that I was thinking about the Vietnam War and the draft lottery, where guys pulled numbers to find out when they were going to get drafted. And everybody else in the room was thinking about basketball. And that draft lottery.
This is true. Can I tell a memorable moment?
Of course.
I mean, you have so many, but there was one when you had brought Kendrick Lamar lyrics in, and I thought that was awesome. And I came to the phone. I ran to the phone when I got back to the gallery. I was like, "Oh, Vivett," I said, "you would love my English professor." I said, "She is like relevant. She's doing things that's happening now." Because Kendrick Lamar had won the Pulitzer Prize, and you were telling everybody, he was like, "This is why I brought it in. It's English, and and it's happening." And I thought that was impressive.
I was very excited that somebody who rapped won a Pulitzer Prize. And it made me go out and buy the music, which I probably would not have.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what to do with the lyrics. Do you remember what I did with the lyrics?
I know you handed them out to everyone.
And I got Sharif. I can't remember his.
I can't remember. I don't remember it. Well, tell me.
I got Sharif to rap it.
Oh, okay. Yes, you did get somebody.
There is, going back to the first thing I was talking about, the politics of the situation, there was no way I was going to try to read Kendrick Lamar's lyrics. I had a feeling that was not.
I want to tell you something though, Professor. Even with me, I knew of Kendrick Lamar, but I did not know how to rap, like his flow, what they would call his flow. I didn't know how to do it in his melody and his style. And so I'm glad you didn't ask me to read it, because I didn't really know too much about him either. I just knew he was a rapper, and I didn't know that he had won that, and there was a great, it was controversy over, because some people in the rap industry were like, it should have been this person, that person, but you brought it to us, and I was grateful for that. And there was something else that I always say that I love and admire about you, is that the way you had our classroom, the structure you came with. You never wavered, in the sense where you question us about, why are these people getting up so much, going to the bathroom? What is this? And then some guys had to tell you, oh yeah, it was medical, some things, but you cut through all the bull, like, nah, it can't be everybody in here has a medical issue, like, no. And you made us sit there in class and made us work. And it made me think of the movie Dangerous Grounds. If you're familiar with that movie.
Dangerous Minds?
It's Dangerous Minds. I thought it was Dangerous Ground. Dangerous Minds. And where the class was so chaotic, but you came in and smoothed things out. Even when some of the guys didn't want to be smoothed out, you gained their respect. And you had my respect from day one, because I was going to school to get away from what was going on in the blocks.
Yeah.
So to be able to go to school and to be in that class environment, and to have a real professor, not to down any other professors, I have some great professors beside you. I'm speaking about you tonight specifically though. And you came with it, you made sure Mercy didn't just give us a degree just to give us a degree. Mm-hmm. You kept that integrity. And I salute you for that. I wish I could even stay longer, but I'm not going to rush out to leave. I had to say that before I go anywhere.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And it's real, because I literally told her just about the exact same thing before you came on. I respected the things you told me about her. I love the way she graded you, that she held you to a high standard. And I hadn't seen that before from your professors up until that point. And I do remember him calling me and telling me about Kendrick Lamar, just telling me about how you just set the guy straight. And I, as a teacher, I'm like, yes, classroom management is necessary. If you don't have your students respect, and if they don't see you as someone who is going to understand them and work with them, then they're not going to it's not going to be a good environment. You have to have the respect, and you earned it. And I was so happy to hear that my husband was getting a quality education, and he had a real English teacher.
Yes.
Yeah, your name came up very often in our conversation.
Well, I can't wait until this thing is over and I can give you both a hug. That would be really
Thank you.
nice. Thank you
so much. I wanted to ask you, Dr. Shaw, about this. I work a lot with the school to prison pipeline. So kids who are middle and high school now entering prison instead of college or a career. But and you work from the opposite end though, where now men are in prison, and through education it's a means of helping them re-enter.
Yeah. That's really interesting, because when I first started, I was so insulted that there was no English major, that the only major that Mercy offered inside was behavioral science. But in fact, that's really smart. I came to see that because I have no way of knowing what the motivation is for the men who come back to school. But it's clear that self-awareness is a byproduct, no matter what the original goal is. And so many of the men have their John, I know you know this, that we are most decidedly not supposed to discuss any of the events that led people to prison.
Yes.
But the self-awareness that comes through in the writing, just in general, and I wrote down a couple of things because I was going to read them. One man wrote, "When I was 17, I was madly in love with stupidity." We talk about that for a long time, because in fact, I think all 17-year-old boys are madly in love with stupidity. My son certainly was, but what was around him was different, so he didn't end up in prison. But I think almost any 17-year-old could. Another guy wrote, "From the age of 9 to 21, I attended the School of Hard Knocks, and that landed me in prison." Another thing I was told before I came in was, oh, they're going to try and con you. They're all going to say they don't belong there. They didn't do anything. I don't think I ever, maybe one guy who it turned out is working with the Exoneration Project. But for the most part, what I heard were things like this: boy, I really screwed up, and I'm here, and I'm going to do the best I can to be different when I get out of here. The other quote that I copied is from somebody that I know you guys know, and that's Kenyatta Hughes.
Oh, yes.
He was never my student, but I've seen the movie Dramatic Escape many times, which I highly recommend if you haven't seen it, and he's in that. And I wrote down something he said. He said, "People say, what the hell are they doing? College in there, putting on plays?" And I want to say, yo, you got to let it go. You got to get over it, because punishing me isn't making you any better. And desiring to punish me is making you worse. But I can't say that because I killed a man. The thoughtfulness, the poignancy, and the intelligence of an analysis like that, I think is mind-boggling.
Mr. Shaw,
Yeah.
I have to excuse myself for other things that I have to do, but I really love you. I appreciate you, and God bless you. God bless you and your family. Thank you for all that you've done for my family in educating me for the time that I was in your class. I really appreciate you.
You are most welcome. I just wish I'd had you for more than one class. Although I don't wish that you were there longer.
I know what you mean. God bless, though. See you later, baby.
All right, honey, I'll see you later. Thank you.
No, thank y'all. All right.
So there were just a couple of other things I was going to say. The third thing was,
and this is so important to share for our viewers who may be wondering, well, what's the relevance of this? The relevance of this for me is to bring the humanity of men who are incarcerated to the forefront of the conversation. Too often their humanity is removed from them. On the political side, we hear, well, why would we be spending tax dollars to educate people who are incarcerated? There is no real effort put into building them back up, restoring them, and helping them to make sense of not only what wound them up in prison, but what the heck are they going to do as when they come out. And just hearing and seeing their thoughts and hearing some of the things that they're able to write down and share in a very public way, I believe there's great value in that. And so thank you for sharing it tonight. Please continue.
I just want to say one thing.
Yeah.
You said tax dollars. The college programs in New York are entirely funded by donation. There's no tax dollars. New York State won't fund a college education. So Hudson Link raises the money and then runs programs in 6 different facilities. Cornell runs some, Bard runs some.
Yes.
There are, I think, 16 or 18 in New York State, and they're all privately funded. There's no tax money at all. For the GED, there is, but not for anything beyond high school.
Okay.
So the other thing I was going to talk about was how different it was for me to teach behind the walls, because to start with, the only technology that I have available is a chalkboard. You know, there's no smart board, there's nothing like that. If I put a request in weeks in advance, I can show a DVD. If I buy the DVD in a sealed package and I can't bring it in, it has to, you know, go through all these channels and be approved. I don't know if they actually watch it or not, but they say they do. But
so even you as a professor, you had to go through the same things that I had to go through?
Yes. Oh, maybe more so, because I'm not bringing it in for one person. I'm bringing it in for 25 people. So anything I bring in, I have to have a gate pass for, unless it's, so if I want to teach 3 short stories before classes start, I have to submit them to Hudson Link, and they submit them to the prison, and then somebody sends me an email and says, okay. Very rarely do they say, no, I can't use some material, but it all has to go through that process. The first time I showed a DVD, I had requested it, and it came, and the, you know, machine came, and they set it up on the desk, and we were all ready to go. So I walked over to the door to switch the lights off. What a shock that was. There's no light switch. In a maximum security prison, you can't turn the lights off. There's no light switch. So,
Wow.
isn't that
the lights go on at the one time and all the lights go off, and
there
someone
is a
else.
central panel by the guards, you know, and they can turn the lights on and off, and I think they dimmed them for us. But you can't turn them off. I am very proud of the fact that I apparently have a reputation in Sing Sing. One of the men told me when I was teaching, and by the way, we're not teaching now because of COVID, but one man said to me, you know, people come by your room to see the little white lady who teaches Harlem literature. I thought that was pretty cool. But the best thing that anybody has said to me since I've been teaching there was in response to a comment that I made the last night of one of my classes. I told my students, I'm bringing you the only thing that an English teacher can bring you into this place, and that's words. And he said, no, you bring us encouragement, and that's something that's in very short supply here. And I thought that was the best compliment.
Oh, that's making me tear up, because
it made me tear up. But that's happened to me once or twice. They don't like that at all.
no. Stay strong. Come on, Shaw, get it together.
I think there is some of that.
Yeah.
I can actually tell you a story about that too, but let's talk a little more first, and then I'll tell you another story.
Okay. So how did you overcome this? First of all, who did you teach before? Were you a white woman teaching white students? And now this was your first time teaching Black students? Because you said Poughkeepsie, so I figured like there's a hood in Poughkeepsie, so I thought perhaps you, like, how did you go from this? In my mind, I assumed that you always taught Black kids, which is why you ended up teaching in a prison. Like, so to hear you say that kind of threw me off a little bit.
My husband has heard me say this many times, but a lot of the men who are in my class, I feel like I taught them in ninth grade, you know, and I blew it because look where they are. So yeah, I've always taught that population. That's how I ended up in an alternative school in San Francisco and in Berkeley. And I taught in Poughkeepsie, mostly white kids, but as soon as they started an alternative school, I went to that because those were the kids, whatever color they were, those were the kids who were not making it in high school. I actually taught in a detention for youth facility for 3 or 4 summers when I was young. That's what I used to do with my summers. I guess I thought that was a good time. So yeah, I've always worked with that population. Moving into a prison was unnerving a little bit at first, but as John can attest, I adjusted very quickly. There are always things that are surprising because there are things you don't know. The first night I was teaching, the very first night, I didn't know enough to ask, and nobody told me how class ended. I guess I just assumed there would be a bell or somebody would tell me or something. And nothing happened. And then there was yelling in the hall. So I did what all these years of teaching trained me to do, which was ignore it. It turns out somebody came in and said, "Do you know what they're yelling?" I said, "No, they're yelling, 'Civilians out.'" And they'd been yelling it for a while, and I was the only one left. So yeah, there's just all kinds of things that you learn just by being there. And most of them I didn't learn before I went in. I learned it by being there.
One of the things that I have learned from having guests on the show and I've met a lot of wonderful guys through knowing John, is that many of them can link their experiences as early as in elementary school to them winding up in prison. There's a direct correlation with a negative experience along their educational journey where they just cut off. It really led them more into the street instead of leading them away. And what do you think about that?
I think it's absolutely true. I think that's why there's so much research and lots of dissertations these days about the school to prison pipeline. But I remember having a conversation more than once. We had a whole segment one time on coming of age stuff. And I remember saying, what happened between 9th and 10th grade? What happened? You know, everyone's talking about, you know, I liked school, I did well in school, and then all of a sudden, boom, you know, I wasn't going to school. And the responses were mostly the lure of the streets, the lure of money. One guy said to me, you know, I didn't know there was an alternative. I never met anybody who graduated from high school. And I said, you mean college? He said, no, I mean high school. It's mind-boggling. I didn't read this because it's pretty horrific, but this is another thing that somebody wrote. I wanted to be a fireman. I had pictures, I watched movies, I hung around the firehouse. I watched them slide down the pole. One day, one of the firemen asked me why I was always hanging out here. And I told him I was going to be a fireman. And he laughed and he said, "You see any black folks here? Go play basketball." I read that and I felt like I wanted to rewind the movie, you know? Had that man said to him, "You want to be a fireman? Come on, slide down the pole, take a look around. Let me show you what this looks like." His whole life might have been different.
Absolutely.
Vivett, you've seen on my email on the bottom, there's a quote from Henry Adams about how a teacher affects eternity, but most of the time you never know what you do. You never know the results. That's why it's such a joy for me when John, who was in my class, says that it was helpful and it made a difference. I'm sure how old are the oldest kids that you've taught, Vivett, now?
now the oldest kids I've taught are, wow, in their mid-20s. I have one who just reached out to me. He's in the Marines now. And, you know, the things that students remember, you know, that I really, it was just me being me and teaching. And he said, you know, I remember when you told us that we're kings. And, you know, we would hear that, you know, we say it in the street like, yo, what up, king? What up, queen? But you actually started teaching us because, and I remember that day where they were really like just off the hook. Like there was an energy in the room that was different, and I couldn't get a grasp of the class. And I said, why are you acting like this when you're kings? This is not how kings act. And they said, kings? And I was teaching at an all boys school at that time in South Jamaica. They said, well, kings, we're not kings. I said, you come from kings, that's your lineage. And I started teaching them about Mansa Musa and going back. And I said, he was the richest man in Solomon. He was a king. They said, we didn't know. He said, you really raised me up that day. And it stuck with me that he reached out to me on Facebook to tell me, invited me to his daughter's baby shower, like just so many ways that it's a very rewarding work. That's why it touches me deeply when it's not respected the way it should be, but the respect comes from the students. And I feed off of what they give me. I teach ninth graders, and so really it's an age that can make or break.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's such an important age.
It really is. And we owe them a lot. I think as education is the key for so many things to change. I will never stop believing that because I've seen the power of education. I see it in my husband every day. I see what it does when you know things and you know what you know, and you can draw from it and you can refer to it, and it does something for our confidence. And I can say as Black people, it is so imperative that we get our education because it was denied to us for so long. And
that also speaks to my coming around to acknowledging why behavioral science is so important, because I see what happens when some of these men take classes in psychology and sociology, and it isn't just looking at them, oh, well, this is my neighborhood, this was my family, this is my community, and these are the things that shaped my destiny. It wasn't just that I woke up and got in trouble one morning. There are just all of these factors. And then I feel like, sure, then we can read literature that also speaks to a lot of different kinds of truths and, yes, a universal experience, but also a very particular experience that's reflected in the Harlem Renaissance.
Did they read Fahrenheit 451? Was that in your class?
It's not in my class. No, I think that's in the 112 class. I've taught a couple of different classes, but I have not taught that.
I remember the lottery. That's Shirley Jackson.
Shirley Jackson, yeah.
Yes, I remember when John read that. And I, at the same time, I was teaching an anthology of short stories. That's how we start off ninth grade to my students. And so I actually drew from it. I hadn't had that in my curriculum, and I forgot about that. I was teaching The Rocking Horse Winner by D.H. Lawrence. So I coupled those two together and did a clear passage. Yeah.
They gave the very first class that I taught, which was John's class, the short story class, they gave me an anthology that was titled The Great American Short Story from Hawthorne to Hemingway. And I looked at it and said, Hemingway died in 1962. You know, this won't do. So I copied about a dozen other short stories and tried to, that was how I rationalized it. I tried to pair them with what was in the book, but every one of them had to be submitted weeks in advance and approved. And I really wonder, I have no idea, at docs in that building, is it somebody's job to sit there and read short stories, watch movies? I don't know. I think they must just scan them for bad language or something. I have no idea.
Yeah, for content, violence, I guess things that might incite. I don't know. I really don't know. I see your husband in the background, and I have to ask, did he ever push back against you teaching in the prison?
Never. Are you listening? No. Peter? Vivett is asking if you ever pushed back against my teaching in the prison. No, never.
Never.
I don't think.
Why would I?
Yeah, it is a gift.
Mm-hmm.
Peter I don't think it would ever occur to him to tell me not to do something or encourage me not to do something that I really wanted. And I think he knows how much I love teaching. So he's really interested in what I do. And Lord knows he's heard me talk about it a lot. But he's also been very welcoming. I think, I'm also on the board of Rehabilitation Through the Arts that puts on plays and does visual arts in the prison. So through Hudson Link and RTA, I come into contact with a lot of guys who are out. And Peter's very welcoming, if they come here and visit, or we'll go to an alumni event or on a fundraiser. We had a fundraiser here for Lawrence Bartley when he was first starting Inside News. And Peter did a lot of work to get the house ready for that.
Well, thank you, Peter, because I know the spouses of teachers go through a lot too. So thank you very much. Wow.
Let's see. I have one more story I can tell you. If you need to talk about something else.
I want to hear all your stories. I want you to share what you know with us. I feel like I'm in class right now, and I miss that too. This is very soothing for my soul, to be quite honest. Thank you.
I was almost tearful the first time somebody used the term terminal degree when I got my doctorate. It's called a terminal. That's it. You're done. And I was almost tearful. It's like, what? Schooling? I think you've had the experience. You tell people that you're a teacher, and for the most part, they're not terribly interested. It's like, hey, you're a teacher, so what? But if I tell people that I teach at Sing Sing, they usually are a little more interested. And I tell them the same things that I've been talking about here. But there's one thing about teaching inside that's really different than any place I've ever taught before. And that's the fact that no matter what my reputation is, when I come to class that first night, there's no trust. There's no, they're willing to learn from me, but they don't relate to me, and that has to do with all the things we talked about before. I'm white, I'm a woman, I'm different, I am educated, I talk differently. There's a million different reasons, but they don't assume that we have anything in common. And there is always something that happens sometime in the first few weeks that changes that dynamic, or at least I hope it always does. And I wait for that because I know that after that happens, the dynamic in the room will be different. And it happened in the most wonderful way one semester when we were reading some stories about coming of age. And we got into a discussion about how the things that happen to you when you're an adolescent mark you forever, whether it's the clothes you wore, the songs that you remember, the first person that you had a big crush on. And I decided to tell the class a story about something that happened to me when I was in 9th grade. And as I mentioned before, telling personal stories on either side is not usually a good idea, but I did do it. And I told them about the fact that when I was in 9th grade, I had a friend named Adrian, and she was not really my friend. She was just somebody who hung out with me when the popular kids didn't want to hang out with her. And there's a lot of that kind of thing in 9th grade. So she had a birthday party and she did not invite me. But what was worse was she said to me, if I have you to the party, the popular kids won't come. So I can't invite you. And I don't think I cried in front of her, but I was devastated, and I don't think we ever spoke after that. That's not the end of the story. Fast forward 20 years, my sister runs into her in a grocery store. And not knowing the part of the story that I just told you, she invites her to the house to surprise me. And for some reason, Adrian decides to come, and I was surprised, but it was awful. I was a grown person. It was like being back in 9th grade again. No time had gone by. I didn't want to talk to her. She didn't stay very long. And then very shortly after she left, Peter and I get in the car to drive home. And I started to cry. And I am not talking about soft, silent tears slipping down my face. I'm talking about, racking. And Peter, who's probably never engaged in any kind of classroom politics, says, "What's wrong?" And I managed to gasp out, "She was so mean to me." And Peter almost drives off the Long Island Expressway, He said, "It was 20 years ago." And I said, "Not to me." Yeah. And this is the story that I told in my classroom to a group of 25 Black and Latino men in a maximum security prison. And the room was very, very quiet. And I'm thinking to myself, that was a mistake. And then a voice from the back of the room says, "Where's she live?"
Yeah, where's she at?
And we all laughed. That was the moment. We had something in common, and we had a really good semester. But
They
there's
understood
always
hurt. They understood you'd been hurt, and you're not gonna hurt my professor and get away with that.
and yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But they also understood that I was being vulnerable, that I was telling them about a time that I was embarrassed and hurt and vulnerable. Yeah. And I think that was part of the dynamic too.
That vulnerability is so important as an educator, no matter where you're teaching. Today, so I'm in a new school, and also teaching remotely. So building that relationship is extremely challenging. And the way I'm building it is by the way I always build it, but even more so is by being vulnerable and saying, listen, I'm kind of scared right now because this is new for me, and I desperately want to show you how much I care about you and how invested I am in you and in your education. And I find it hard to do that this way. And when I did that today, a student just said, "Well, we're really nice here, so you don't have to worry about it, and I'll help you if you want me to." And just by me not going in, and as you said earlier, being that authoritarian that is so often the role of teachers in the classroom, but kind of leveling that playing field. And then other students got to say, "I'm new here also. I'm new to this country, not just new to this school." And having others say, "Well, I've been in this school since like 6th grade, so don't worry about it. I got you."
Mhm.
And it just felt so much better. But I had to lead by example with being vulnerable and just letting them know I don't have it all together right now, to be honest with you. The Zoom link didn't work. I'm a little shaken up right now. The kids were actually waiting on me to let them in. I'm like, oh, if this is a real classroom, it would be horrible if I was rushing in late and the kids were already sitting down and I was the one late to class. So as I hear you share that story, it just makes me really see that best practices are best practices, no matter what environment you're teaching in. They're just things you need to do in a way you need to be as a teacher that is going to resonate with your students.
Somebody asked me once in a class I was teaching, a teacher's college, if you just had to give me one piece of advice as a new teacher, what would it be? And I said, before you say anything to anybody about their behavior or something they did wrong or why they didn't have their homework, ask them if they're okay. And I think that's the single most, it disarms them, it unnerves them. It's like, wait a minute, you're not going to yell at me about this. I'll tell you if I'm okay. And I think that's really what you're talking about too, is the humanity of being in a classroom. One of the things, by the way, that occurred to me while you were talking about that is when you went to remote learning last spring,
Yes.
you already knew your students. So making that transition, you already knew who had a tough time getting up in the morning and who had a sister who was there last year, but maybe she isn't this year. And, all those things that are so important to know. And this year, you have to get to know them remotely.
Yeah.
What a task that is.
And to get to know their families as well, because it's not just them, it is really more of a family endeavor, because they are home. So, one young man said, I wanted to come to school, but I can't because my mom is pregnant and I don't want to get her sick because I may get my little sister sick. That's not something I might have known in a regular, in a traditional classroom setting, especially on the second day of school and the first day of knowing each other. And I noticed last year, not last year, last school year, but in March, as I had to do more outreach, I did get to know their families more, but they were slipping away a little bit. I didn't have the same connection with them because they could turn it on or they could, like I'm doing, turn it off and become a name. And then I could be teaching to just a name. It's very, like, that's not real to me. I need this. I can see now you're looking at me, you're making eye contact, we're connecting, but it's just not my way. I'm like you, I walk around, I touch, we laugh, we joke, you come to my desk. I'm that teacher that everyone hangs out in her room after class.
Mhm.
And
There's no hanging out, as I'm sure you know, and Sing Sing. Although I will say that nobody has ever said a word to me about walking around the classroom or I don't know that I touch people maybe on the shoulder or something. Once I handed somebody a paper. I was this way and I turned around and handed a paper. His back was to me and he jumped in. He said, "You don't come up behind somebody in prison." That was another thing that I learned. Okay, you always hand out papers from the front of the room, not from behind people.
what would you say to people? We have a few minutes left. What would you say to people who say, you know what, Mikki Shaw, you're wasting your time. Why are you doing this? Is this self-serving? What are you doing
I,
teaching in a prison? They're not going to change. They're derelicts.
it's not an unheard of conversation. There are people who think that. There are also conversations I have with myself about the whole white savior thing. Um, but The recidivism rate in this country is about 62%, I think, the rate at which people return to prison after 3 to 5 years. If you have an education, the recidivism rate drops to 6%. I mean, that's mind-boggling. So if you want to tell me that you have better teachers or teachers of color or something like that, and they should go in instead of me, okay, you know, but if somebody is lining up to do it, I'm in that line, because I think it really does make it. I know it makes a difference. And again, because I see John, I see so many of the students, so many of the men from RTA also. I've never taught in a women's prison, and there is one up here, and I'd like to. So I hear myself over and over again saying he, him. Sometime I'd like to teach women also.
Goals, teaching goals.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Mikki, for being here tonight.
Yes, I was worried that we wouldn't have enough to talk about, but that does not appear to have been a problem.
I was never worried about that. You're most engaging and you're most genuine, and you're bar none. You really are a class act. I salute your parents, the people from, thank you, who are the people that raised you and who poured into you and saw a light in you that we all get to see now. I salute them as well. I don't
How nice.
know if they knew what they were doing for all of us when they encouraged you to go to school, but I thank them. And I'm so grateful for the opportunity to share this time in life with you. Life is ever fleeting. And so to just really connect in a time when there's so much division amongst us based on our color or our religion, it just feels really warm and natural to connect with you. And I can tell you, if you've done nothing for no one else, you've done a great deal for my husband and for my family. And for that, we are eternally grateful. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. And I wish you health and safety. And I hope things calm down at school. I hope you have a wonderful school year. I can't imagine what that's going to look like. But I do have some sort of cockeyed optimism that things are going to get better as the year draws to an end. So
I'm going to go with that. I'm an optimist too. It'll get better. It will. Thank you. Have a lovely evening. Good night, Mr. Shaw. Take care. Good night, Peter.
Different last names.
Oh, I apologize. Good night, Peter.
Night. Peter is good. Yes.
Yeah, Peter's good.
Good night, Vivett. Now I should hit leave.
You can. Yes, it's fine. We're going to end for the night. Thank you for everyone for joining us tonight. And we will see you again, all being well, on next week, Monday. Have a good evening.
Good night.
Good night.
All right, you're out. Thank you so much.